Channel 3 Moscow is a production of KTCA-TV, Channel 2, for stations of the Minnesota Public Television Network.
Hello, I'm Joe Summers. The subject of politics in the Soviet Union got lots of TV airtime worldwide this past month as the Soviets held their 27th Communist Party Congress. Tonight, we'll see some of the same coverage of that Congress that the Soviet people did through the eyes of Soviet television. We'll also see the Soviets' unusually candid coverage of their recent space launch of the manned Soyuz T-15 spacecraft. And we'll find out how Soviet citizens are reacting to a recent crackdown on street crime, jaywalking, that is.
Show your documents, please.
And there's lots more where these stories came from, plus our regular panel of Soviet experts and Chris Sanda to boot. So don't go away. Stay with us for the March edition of Channel 3 Moscow. One of the most interesting stories on Soviet television this month, their unusually extensive and candid coverage of the launch of the Soyuz T-15 spaceflight on March 13th.
Our first segment tonight contains several excerpts from the Soviets' live coverage. Unfortunately, this first report came to us late in the month, and for reasons that I barely understand myself, the result is slightly substandard technical quality. So don't worry about your TVs. Our reports tonight are translated by Sally Lincoln, and the narrator is Lori Kamen.
On March 13, 1986, at 3:33 p.m. Moscow time, the Soyuz T-15 spacecraft blasted off, carrying Flight Commander Leonid Denisovich Kizmin and Flight Engineer Vladimir Alexeyevich Solovyov.
Прошло уже около 1,5 часов, как космонавты Леонид Кизим и Владимир Соловьев заняли свои места в корабле.
1.5 hours have already passed since cosmonauts Kizmin and Solovyov took their places in the spacecraft. There are still about 10 minutes until takeoff. This gives us a little time to talk with the crew. Since we have a few minutes until we are connected to speak with them, I'd like to show some tapes of the cosmonauts before they get into the spaceship. As usual, the crew gets ready 3 hours before takeoff. The examination is rather lengthy. The cosmonauts play a rather passive role in all this. These are the moments of their last chats with their comrades and the flight commanders. Lonya, when you get back, let's take a fishing trip. All the conversations are through glass. The crew is fully sterilized. Even the air is filtered. Some infections that are totally harmless on Earth could wreak havoc and spoil a spaceflight. There is a short walk to the point where the cosmonauts will depart for the launch pad. At this moment, a report is given to the representative of the Government Space Commission. Comrade Representative to the Government Space Commission, the flight crew is prepared. We wish you a successful flight and successful fulfillment of the flight operations and a safe return to Earth. Located here is a space center not far from Moscow, where communications take place with the spacecrafts. Televised images and sound are carried by these channels. In the main hall of the center is my colleague Alexander Tikhomirov. Can you hear us? We hear you. We hear you very well. Yesterday at the press conference, you said you just wanted sleep. Did you manage to sleep well? Yes, we always do. Attention, the takeoff will take place in 1 minute. All rocket systems and connections with the Earth monitoring system are fully ready for takeoff. What are your comrade cosmonauts feeling right now? In their little cage there, they are focusing on their last few minutes on Earth and the time ahead of them in space. I wish them luck in reaching the station.
Экипаж закончил все необходимые работы на борту корабля. Сейчас готов к старту.
The crew has finished all the necessary tasks on board the spaceship. They are waiting for the engines to start. We wish them a successful flight.
Joining us tonight, as usual, is Nick Hayes of Hamline University, Macalester College, and the University of Moscow periodically. Nick, were the Soviets laid their plans to televise this before the Challenger disaster, or don't you know?
I don't know, but I would presume they had. And it was a nice bit of luck and coincidence for them. We've seen before that there's been more media coverage, closer coverage to space expeditions beginning last summer, various other coverage we've seen of the cosmonauts. And there apparently was a decision to increase the media coverage of this particular event. And then, of course, the luck that due to the American disaster, it, not by plan, but just by a bit of good luck, comes off as a way of promoting the Soviet space program over the American program. But there's one other, I mentioned luck, and it's important because they also take a risk here. Unlike, one of the reasons why they never televise space launches live before is because there's a gamble. What's going to happen is what happens to the Americans, and so there's an element of risk.
Well, as a matter of fact, we've heard from our intelligence sources, haven't we, that they've had some major disasters in their space program.
Of course they have. And these have, actually, it was only with the recent American disaster that they tacitly admitted that there had been some problems with their own. This is never a matter of public discussion or publicity in the Soviet Union.
Nick, this shoot, as they call it, or whatever, is not like our shuttle program where we have a commercial venture to try to get cargo into space, but yet they're touting this space platform. How would you characterize their entrepreneurship versus ours, or lack thereof?
Well, it's not a private venture, but it's part of a long-going Soviet plan to maintain a space laboratory, which they justify. Publicly, the justification is for state reasons of scientific research and space exploration and so on.
Yeah, unlike us, they're not interested in military uses of space.
Of course not.
God forbid we should have a Bombsky or two up in the space platform. But I think we'll be seeing something later on about a cooperative venture between the Russians and space. That apparently they didn't invite us.
Who did you think those pictures that they showed on the walls by the TV monitors, those photographs, were they other cosmonauts?
I assume they're other cosmonauts. And this, one of the nice aspects of this whole shot is, in addition to the increased media coverage, it's the humanization of the cosmonauts and even the general there, the friendly general. Oh, let's go fishing when you come back. You know, it's just try to give a more human image to the Soviet public of their leaders and the kind of heroization of the cosmonauts.
I thought it was great.
I thought it was too, and one thing that looked exactly like our guys is that before the launch, those two space program experts they were interviewing looked mighty nervous.
I would be too, especially when they said your last moments on Earth.
Yeah, terrible. I'm glad they cut right into before your arrival in space. Do you expect to see more of this sort of coverage under Gorbachev?
In general, we've seen, and I expect to see more because it's plain, well, not just of the space launches, but virtually all aspects, the increased presence of the media to create a more human and to use the media as a way of kind of warming Soviet life, yes.
Well, Nick, if you will, let's move on into our next segment. Another story that dominated the Soviet airwaves this month was the 27th Communist Party Congress. Now, in many respects, this is not like anything we'll see in the West, but the Soviets seemed right at home, especially Mikhail Gorbachev.
The 27th Communist Party Congress received extensive coverage on Soviet television last month, including the arrivals of honored guests and participants from around the world, like Gus Hall from the United States. But the spotlight for the 10-day meeting shone primarily on Soviet party leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Demonstrating his growing political strength, Gorbachev made several changes in top government posts. In addition to solidifying his support in the Politburo, Gorbachev used the party Congress as a platform for some very unusual Soviet self-examination.
There's a tendency toward stagnation in life and in society. The situation calls for change, but the central organs, standing where they are, have tried to gain the upper hand using their own style psychology. How can we improve the system without changing a thing? This will not be, comrades. As the saying goes, if you stand still on one spot, you'll find yourself behind by a mile. We can't back away from solving these imminent problems.
The lighter side of Mikhail Gorbachev is rarely seen on television. But Soviet viewers did have a chance to see Gorbachev smile when he broke from his prepared text to describe the irony in an ongoing problem in the Soviet Union: inferior workers producing inferior products.
For some reason, you did not applaud when I said that it is time to put an end to the situation in which industrial collectives produce goods which are simply tossed away, while the workers manage to feel at ease and get their pay.
While much of the party Congress focused on Mikhail Gorbachev's speech, members of the media also talked to foreign observers, including Cuban leader Fidel Castro.
Dear Comrade Castro, how does the 27th Party Congress compare with your heroic party? Can one say that Cuban and Soviet communists experienced the same feelings of enthusiasm, optimism, and hope?
Оптимизма, энтузиазма и надежды.
Yes, although our party is young and new. I would save my most glorious words about a party to praise the Soviet party.
Not all of those involved with the party Congress are as well known as Fidel Castro. Like American TV coverage of political events, Soviet TV also offers human interest stories on small-town delegates, as we see in this report from February 16th.
Nina Alexandrovna Yegorchenko.
Nina Alexandrovna Yegorchkina has been chosen to be a delegate to the 27th Party Congress. She's a milkmaid from the Mayak Ilich collective farm of the Chubylinsky region of the Kemersk area.
Да, я очень люблю петь, очень люблю.
Yes, I really love to sing. But all the same, I am one who's involved with working with animals. I went to the farm as a little girl to help my mother, and I grew very attached to the animals. So then, when I finished school, I went to work on the farm. But I didn't give up singing. Nina is a group party leader for her party section. There has been talk of building a new milk complex and creating new facilities for the breeders. Such useful projects occupy the full interest of the communists and Nina Alexandrovna. We have a lot of projects going on, but in order for all this to take place, we need peace on earth.
Программой коммунистического созидания вооружил партию.
Soviet cosmonauts also kept a close eye on last month's Party Congress, as we see in this report from March 7th.
С помощью средств телевидения гостями 27-го съезда.
By means of television connections, Soviet cosmonauts Vilichin, Kaglaskov, Izin, and Solovyov were able to be guests of the 27th Party Congress. In what light do you understand the meaning of this concept, speeding up, which was constantly discussed at the Party Congress? We understand this to mean that we will have to pay more attention to the quality of cosmonaut preparation. You know that we can't carry a poorly trained pilot on an airplane. We have to train him on Earth.
The 27th Party Congress ended on a high note, so to speak, as Mikhail Gorbachev led delegates and foreign guests in the singing of the Internationale.
Joining us now with Nick Hayes are Steve Feinstein, a Soviet history professor from the University of Wisconsin at River Falls, and Norma Noonan, who teaches political science at Augsburg College in Minneapolis. Welcome to all of you.
Welcome.
Norma,
Thank you.
What is a party congress?
Well, every 5 years, the party meets, not like our quadrennial conventions, but the party meets to set policy for the next 5 years. And the highlight of the Congress is the speech of the General Secretary, which is the State of the Union address.
Oh, okay.
Where we are, where we're going, and where we ought to be going.
How do you get to a party congress?
Luck.
Steve and Norma, what I'd like to find out, when we were looking at the milkmaid, Comrade Nina, I believe, and it showed her pitching hay, it showed her walking through the snowy area. Did she go to a precinct like caucus, like we went through last night, to get there? Steve, what do you think about that?
Well, the party structure goes from the Union Republic all the way down to the collective farms. So there is a system that actually parallels the Soviet government, and people, if they've been politically correct from the very beginning, have been members of Komsomol and have been active party members and cultivate the right friendships and generally do the right things, can in fact become party members.
That sounds very familiar, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And you know, the terrain is so much like northern Minnesota. I was struck with that.
Most of the Soviet Union is.
Well, Nick, does a party congress set any sort of policy, or is it more in the nature of a celebration?
Well, historically there's been many different types. So this one is not so much setting the agenda for the future as it really brought an era to a close. It consolidated Gorbachev's position that he's moved into over the last year, and the most dramatic things that were said is not about changes for the future, but about what the problems were with Brezhnev and the inertia, the style of leadership, and so on. I would guess that there might be a more dramatic party congress coming in the future when he begins to talk more seriously. Having raised expectations, he's going to have to, say, in the next 5 years, talk more seriously about structural changes to meet those expectations.
The most important thing that I observed was that he departed from protocol and the first day made a short, biting speech about the problems of the Soviet Union. And normally you would not have that special speech. You would normally go into your formal address. And so I see that as setting a tone. Criticism, no more stagnation, let's get going.
Something that's always startled me about the party congresses is that they're always written up as featuring a 2 or 2.5 hour long speech. Do they have special schools in how to stay awake during party congresses?
No, that's very important. I mean, because I think our media misrepresents this when they talk about Castro or communist leaders in general. They call them harangues, long, involved speeches. They're long, that's right. But here it has one specific purpose. The last party congress, Brezhnev, was televised for something like 7 minutes. Gorbachev for 5.5 hours. And the point is, number one, that this is a man that's capable of getting up there and making an intelligent presentation for 5.5 hours. He knows the material. He could even talk off his notes for a while. And it's also a sense of responsibility to the program, that the leader knows the program. It's not just a mere ceremony. He knows it, he goes through the details, and he presents it.
Steve, I'd like to ask kind of a basic question as just an observer, casual. It seems that the military people and even the civilians always take great pains to display all what we would call their fruit salad, all of their medals, all of their decorations. It seems so pompous to us as Americans.
Patriotism is a very important thing in the Soviet Union. The legacy of the Second World War is a very strong image on all aspects of society. If you're ever in the Soviet Union on May Day or on the anniversary of the revolution, people wear their medals, widows wear the medals of their husbands. It's an important cultural thing because it ties you to the regime, and it sort of puts you in a place in terms of the state building of the past. And there are privileges to people who have been wounded and who have served in this special capacity.
Well, Steve, Norman, Nick, I think it's time for us to move on.
A bit later in tonight's show, we'll be offering you a chance to browse through the English language edition of Pravda. All you need to do to record this final few minutes of the program on any VCR that has freeze frame advance. We'll tell you about that later. But first, we'll take a look at some of the Soviets' coverage this past month of international events, beginning with the demise of former Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos.
Президента Филиппин Маркоса. Об этом сообщил корреспонденту японского агентства Киода Цусима.
On February 26th, Vremya presented this straightforward story about the dramatic change of leadership in the Philippines.
Президент Филиппин Маркос сложил с себя полномочия главы государства.
Philippine President Marcos gave up his full power as head of government and left the presidential palace by helicopter. With his family, he reached the U.S. Clark Air Force Base. In taking oath of office, Aquino announced the creation of her new government. Laurel was named prime minister. Former members of the Marcos government, Enrile and Ramos, were named responsible for the posts of national defense and head of the armed forces. 8 advisors were chosen to fill out the ministries. Supplementary support on U.S. Air Force bases in the Philippines was ordered to be on battle alert. Sea infantry and instructors in piloting battleship operations were ordered to be alerted for any extreme circumstances.
Администрация США, как подтвердил в своем последнем радиообращении президент Рейган,
The contents of President Reagan's State of the Union message was the subject of this Soviet news report from February 12th. It describes the apparent impact Reagan's budget would have on America's poor.
According to President Reagan's recent radio broadcast, the Washington administration intends to make federal budget cuts in social programs which are life necessities for millions of the neediest Americans. At the same time that the president was giving his State of the Union address, 2 blocks away from the Capitol resounded another State of the Union address, which sharply contrasted with Reagan's assessment. The press gave it some attention, but all the same, without this other State of the Union message, it would be hard to imagine the real situation in America. Those giving this State of the Union address said that those who are temporarily homeless or totally homeless and unemployed have much in common. The message focused on them. It was about the 800 Washingtonians who come every night to this shelter, about the 5,000 sleeping on the streets of Los Angeles, about the 10,000 homeless children in New York. There was no mention of this in Reagan's speech before Congress. Instead, there was lots of applause. The president had invited 4 outstanding teenagers to the joint meeting where he delivered his address and warmly congratulated them before the eyes of the whole country. The Washingtonians who are living in shelters brought a group of homeless boys and girls to the ceremony. This group is just 6 out of 6 million hungry children of America living on the edge of poverty.
6 из 6 миллионов голодных детей Америки, 6 из 14 миллионов живущих за гранью бедности, 6 из неизвестного числа беспризорных и бездомных. Им от 8 месяцев.
The situation has not reached the point where these homeless are in the majority in America, but the number of poor children in rich America is increasing. When the president spoke of a strong America, he was talking about strong military personnel. But these children here think that a strong America means a country where the citizens can get work. Indeed, there were 2 State of the Union addresses in Washington.
The tragic explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger received a tremendous amount of coverage on Soviet TV. As more information about the accident became available, Soviet TV continued to follow the story. This report appeared February 16th.
Прибывшая в Центр космических полетов имени Кеннеди на мысе Канаверал, штат Флорида.
The Special Presidential Commission investigating the Challenger disaster has recently spent time at Cape Canaveral in Florida viewing new tapes of the Challenger's takeoff. According to an ABC report, the films clearly show smoke escaping from the right rocket booster immediately after the takeoff. Representatives of NASA meanwhile cannot explain the reasons for this. However, ABC photographs show that the process causing the explosion began right after takeoff. The Presidential Challenger Commission announced that the commission gave orders to exclude from participation those NASA workers who carried responsibility for the Challenger program, including the shuttle program director. The commission decided not to include those individuals who were responsible for the takeoff which ended in disaster. Such people would not be objective enough to do an investigation. Commission representatives announced that in the commissioner's opinion, serious errors were committed. Among them was the fact that hazardous weather conditions were not regarded.
Челленджера, закончившегося катастрофой, не проявят должной объективности при расследовании.
Not all Soviet coverage of the Challenger disaster was so straightforward. Some, like this report from February 12th, emphasized the militaristic aspect of the U.S. Space Shuttle program.
Катастрофа, постигшая американский космический корабль многоразового использования «Челленджер».
The Challenger accident exposed the extraordinary danger of militarizing space. If the United States doesn't draw this kind of conclusion from the Challenger tragedy, there awaits an explosion in the future similar to the one that destroyed the Challenger along with its crew. The main difference will be that this explosion will cause the entire Earth to burn, according to an article in the New York Times written by a scientific representative to the Organization for Peace and International Security.
Саманта Смит, погибшая в прошлом году американская школьница,
Samantha Smith, the young American schoolgirl, was in the Soviet news again last month. This report from February 28th charges that the FBI followed Smith's activities closely during her brief career as an ambassador of peace.
К такому выводу пришли авторы документальной передачи.
The American schoolgirl who was internationally known for her plea for peace, who died in an air crash last year, was kept under close watch by the FBI for a long time. This conclusion was reached by the makers of a documentary film at the KRON television station in San Francisco. The FBI, frightened by Samantha's peace mission to the USSR, followed her tormentingly, according to KRON. Even now, several months after her tragic death, the FBI dossiers on Samantha Smith are stored, as in the past, with totally secret documents on national defense and foreign affairs.
Soviet TV rarely shows Soviet military operations, but on February 24th, we did see this extensive report about one of the Soviet Union's top military academies, this one located in Leningrad.
Служба в рядах вооруженных сил – почетная обязанность и священный долг гражданина СССР.
Every Soviet person is obligated to do everything in its power to support the military capability of the country. The defense of the socialist fatherland and military service is an honorable and sacred duty of Soviet citizens. These words are from the new edition of the Communist Party program. They outline the meaning and significance of military service in our country. All the students and teachers of the Kirov Higher Military Institute share the same goal of defending the peace-loving interests of the country and in fighting for socialism. Here, future commanders study contemporary battle methods and how to lead their officers in the most difficult conditions.
Здесь учатся будущие командиры, учатся приемам современного боя, умению руководить своими подразделениями в самых сложных условиях.
Я учусь на первом курсе, и до выпуска еще целых 4 года. Так что для меня и моих сокурсников многое в новинку, хотя первые шаги уже сделаны.
I'm a first-year student. The whole course of study takes 4 years. This means a lot of new stuff for my classmates and me to cover. We are taking our first steps. You saw how the older students here take part in exercises which resemble real battles. They study how to use war machines, manage infantry, attack the enemy, and undertake expeditions in any weather, such as in deep snow. Soon we first-year students will be learning all of this, but first we have to undertake preparatory work. We have to learn how to work with a map, how to get directionally oriented, and how to accurately make decisions when in battle. In modern war, the commander plays an especially great role. Here are 2 generations of military people. The father has already been awarded a medal for his courage in a real battle against the enemies of the Afghan Revolution. And his son, a future officer, chose, by his father's example, his main life path to be an internationalist fighter. True patriotism was born in this family. The true fighter is capable, strong, decisive. Here on these practice fields, they maneuver with war machines and lead squads made up of fellow class members. And furthermore, on the very earth where they engage in these exercises, they're reminded about their duty. Exactly here in 1941, the defenders of Leningrad did not let the enemy get through. And in January 1944, these boundaries, they completely freed the city from the blockade. Every clump of earth reminds these youth of the feats of their grandfathers, soldiers and commanders of the great fatherland war.
Это мой отец, Алексей Петрович Дикий.
This is my father, Alexei Petrovich Diki. He is a teacher in our academy. He gives instruction in the use of war weapons. At one time, father was a student too. Now he's a colonel. As far as I can remember, my brother and I felt ourselves devoted to the idea of army service. We felt a love for the profession of commander. First my brother, then I, became part of the military family. As it turned out, all of us are involved, even mother. I am convinced that commanding is an excellent profession. When you are in command of the defense of the country, you train young men to become strong, courageous fighters. Everywhere the goals of Soviet fighters are being met. Father fulfilled his duty fighting on Afghan soil.
Say, you know, just as a sidelight, we checked with KTCA-TV in San Francisco, and they simply say they said nothing of the sort about the FBI tormenting Samantha Smith. It's one of the few fabrications that we've run across.
This is a non-footnoted broadcast.
I guess not.
But wouldn't you think that if any of our children were going to be going to the Soviet Union, I would really want someone from the FBI or someone to keep an eye out so they don't get snitched to be a hostage?
I'm sure that the, not in Russia.
FBI has any power in the,
No, not in
the
Russia.
Soviet
We're
Union.
talking about here. So, I mean, if the Committee for Free Latvia might steal them, but the reference to tormenting is simply false. KTCA-TV. But let's get to what we actually saw. We saw once again the Russians concentrating on homelessness and poverty in the United States. How do the Russians deal with the homelessness problem? I thought they had a housing shortage.
They had a serious homelessness problem in the 20s and 30s.
Actually, through the 50s, through after the war too.
That's true, right? But they do not have the same structural problem as the United States has in this regard, and it's handled. That is, you have a guarantee by the state of a right to a certain number of meters per person where you can reside. And even in the local community, there is an official responsible for your housing. You provide that person with an application, and they have to find you the housing. Usually they have, at the bottom line, some sort of state dormitory or housing facility. But in rural communities, it's even possible that you may find, the other side of this is that you may find that you have an unwanted lodger in your home. That
okay,
is,
the question though, Nick,
if
is
you have more space.
if you, these are administrative decrees, these are laws. The question is, what is the implementation level of these laws? I mean, from a tourist point of view and even from a diplomatic point of view, there are only so many cities in the Soviet Union that are open for foreigners. So what happens in those small towns in Siberia or the small towns outside of Moscow where tourists can't get in? What is the situation? Are there homeless? I mean, there are occasions, even in big cities, when you see people walking into cafeterias and taking food off of trays. There is that sort of hunger-ridden group in the cities that you see occasionally.
You know,
but I would agree with you. You don't see the homeless too much as a tourist, certainly.
Sure. As a tourist, you're not going to go out in these countryside, these poor rural areas that may have the problem. But, Steve, the best response to that is what you do hear from Russians is what is their consciousness of problems? What do they complain about? And they will complain about shortages. They will complain about overcrowded housing. Right. But I've never found any consciousness of this as being a problem in the Soviet Union. Homelessness.
Besides that, if we got homeless in Washington where you could see them, if they had homeless in Moscow, you could see them, because Moscow's not off limits.
Yeah, but the Soviet government makes it very clear that those people come off the streets whenever there's a large number of tourists and even political people. I mean, anything that looks a little bit off color does change very rapidly. When Nixon went to Moscow the first time, I mean, they moved dissidents out. They repainted the facades of buildings from the airport into the downtown. But this is not to say that it does.
Do if the president
but the point is, I think Nick's point is well taken. That the issue is not a major one that's of public concern.
There was a fascinating story in that military academy. Did you notice the stress on defense? As though the Russian army is never going to be used to attack anybody.
Well, the emphasis on sacred honor and duty.
Yes. This is a classic piece of promoting the Soviet military for the 80s. And, I mean, it had all, think of what the symbolism was. That we're defending Leningrad, historic Leningrad, here in our Russian winter. The sense of pride, family tradition, references to heroism in Afghanistan.
Yes, can you believe it, Afghanistan?
Well, my reading of it, primarily, it was actually directed towards the military, and it's directed towards morale in the military. Take pride in your work. It's not about the infantry soldiers and whatever. It's really appealing to officers, taking pride in the education.
Would it be like their equivalent of an ROTC?
Well, the institute itself
what kind of place is that?
It's the equivalent of a post-secondary military training institute. The military academies are separate from the regular higher education facilities. So, I mean, in terms of the degree, yes, it's equivalent to an ROTC degree, but the whole curriculum is more like a separate military academy.
I looked at the young man as representing the Soviet youth who's patriotic and loyal and has a sense of the past. Because one hears rumors that the young men are doing everything they can to avoid being drafted, to go to Vietnam. I was going to say Vietnam, but it's Afghanistan.
Well, same deal.
Yeah, same deal. And the same kinds of behavior and, you know, desire that you hope you have something wrong with you.
But you notice this wasn't a portrait of war. It wasn't a portrait of real fighting.
Defense.
It was glamorized
It was
fighting. And it showed nice tanks moving up and down hills, and it showed guys working in some sort of, was it a computer or language lab? I don't know what it was. Notice even that one scene of kind of the romantic music behind it.
Be all there is to be.
Right,
But there is a...
And also not a single mention of the party. We're talking
this
about
is the defense
fatherland.
force. This is
this is the fatherland.
But the Soviet army is in a big problem, and this is because of a demographic issue in the Soviet Union. Because of the decline in the birth rate, which has been going on for a number of years now, I think the statistics I read said that by the late 1980s, the Soviets were going to have to draft every 18-year-old in the country just to meet the requirements of the army. And this is, well, again, this may be a tragedy from an individual's point of view who doesn't want to go into army service for 2 years. But if you look at this piece, it's designed to impress on him the nationalism, the patriotism aspect of it.
Everybody in there looked like an ethnic Russian, too.
There are a few, yes, a few minority people in there.
Do the Russians have what we would have, the equivalent of a National Guard, per se? Do they have like a home guard, like we know of in Norway, that takes its winter training at Ripley? And those scenes kind of reminded me of that.
Structurally, it's an old military argument that goes back to Marxism and the communist movement. In the 1920s, they did have the equivalent. They were called territorial militias. They do have reserve units, but no, they do not have our equivalent of locally commanded National Guards.
Do they have women in their armed services?
Women are generally discouraged. First of all, they're not drafted, and they are even discouraged from entering as volunteers, and I believe the numbers are minuscule into the types of service roles they can perform. Norma probably is closer to the information on this than I am, but I think it's limited to about only 10,000 or so women are actually in service capacity in the Soviet armed forces.
Yeah, during the war, of course, there were quite a few, but since then, it's really become something for men only.
The sacred duty, the honor, follow like your father, be a hero.
Right. Yes.
Folks, we've got some more and more interesting stuff coming up, so let me just grab you and go on to our next segment. After viewing many hours of Soviet TV over the past several months, we've certainly found lots of variety in our programming. You can go from art shows to game shows. In fact, just going somewhere seems to be a recurrent theme in this next segment, whether you travel on foot, by bus, or in the Vega spacecraft.
Soviet TV coverage of its manned spaceflight last week was only one example of the Soviets' apparent willingness recently to share its accomplishments in space with the rest of the world. The Soviet Vega space mission, a collaborative effort with several nations, was another. Last month, 2 Vega spacecraft took these rare pictures of the planet Jupiter before taking these now famous images of Halley's Comet.
On the screen we see in miniature a so-called experiment of the passport. Scientists from 9 countries work together, and what was once only a fantasy is today appearing before our very eyes. The Soviet space station Vega 1 has flown past the tail of Halley's Comet. What is so miraculous about what has taken place is that the Vega station has come within 9,000 kilometers of the comet, which is a total of 170 million kilometers away from Earth. Admittedly, the comet is not very visible, but this is a real miracle. It's fantastic.
Прошла очень близко от него, на расстоянии 9000 километров. Это является большим чудом.
This miracle could be accomplished because of a well-thought-out program of scientific work that many organizations in a range of countries participated in. That they worked together harmoniously and got such good results, this also is a miracle.
И что они слаженно работали и получили такие хорошие результаты, тоже является чудом. Естественно, очень трудно дать.
We've seen outlines of a double nucleus. It has been known for a long time that the nucleus of a comet could divide, and here it seems evident that Halley's has a double nucleus. At this time, it is difficult to completely evaluate the scientific information received, but I'd like to say that these results will be unique and priceless for world science.
This next report also deals with space technology. This one, however, is a bit closer to home. It describes a procedure used by the publishers of Pravda to transmit the publication from Moscow to Vladivostok via satellite, a distance of approximately 5,500 miles. Soviet entrepreneurs could call this USSR today.
Photocopies of main newspapers will be received by the communicators living in Vladivostok. They will have, it appears, a new profession. Besides receiving transmission of television programs via the inner-city network, they have begun to receive the images of newspaper columns from Moscow. The images will be received by means of satellite with the help of a special apparatus which creates exact copies of the newspaper on film. The process of transmitting and receiving images at a distance of more than 9,000 kilometers takes only 2 to 3 minutes, and after 10 minutes, the actual film comes out. Here we are looking at a prepared copy of the newspaper. In the past, the Soviet Far East got central newspapers by airplane, and getting them depended on weather conditions. But now, thanks to satellite, we are able to organize their publication and distribution to subscribers in the shortest amount of time.
Because we inhabitants of the Soviet Far East greet the day 7 hours earlier, we will read the paper considerably earlier than the inhabitants of Moscow and other cities in the central part of our country. Besides all this, we expect a large savings in transport and labor costs. Also, I will add that Vladivostok is the 14th Soviet city to be provided with Pravda by satellite.
In an apparent move to avoid waiting in line, more and more Soviets are ordering their groceries in advance. This report from February 5th shows that at this particular store, the service is so popular that automated baggers have been installed to help meet the demand.
The basic project of Soviet social economic development includes a plan to develop stores which take and fulfill orders for goods. How long does it take you to open a new plastic shopping bag? You take it, rumple it, and flap it. Here in this store in the Kirov region of Moscow, where one can place orders, an automatic machine wins the battle with a plastic bag. In 10 seconds, it not only opens the bag, but helps to assemble grocery orders of 5 to 8 items. But of course, as in every new experiment, there are certain difficulties. There is a need for additional space for storing groceries, a need for highly qualified workers, and above all, it is already clear that the capacity of such a complex surpasses the possibilities of one small store. Perhaps in a large city it would make sense to develop a regional order department which could more accurately guarantee its work and make full use of the apparatus. Then every one of us will benefit from this time-saving operation.
This next report describes a new kind of city bus used in the province of Tajikistan in Central Asia. Its use of natural gas fuel is said to be both economical and good for the environment.
Tajikistan experiments have been done with buses running on natural gas. In the Dushanbe experimental auto repair factory, there's been a lot of work on the fuel equipment system in the well-known Ikaris buses. At the plant, they've put out an engine and a simply constructed fuel mixing system, thanks to which the buses are now able to use a mixture of diesel fuel and natural gas. The first fleet of modernized buses is already on the street in the Tajik capital, carrying passengers.
Dushanbe
Dushanbe is one of the largest growing cities in the country. Today on the streets are more than 19,000 cars, and their number is growing. Naturally, this increases the gas pollution of the environment. Now we have begun a massive transformation to make the engines work on this special fuel. This year we'll transform 100 buses to this new fuel, which gives more than 500 tons of combustibility and about 50,000 rubles of savings. In Tajikistan, this switch to economic and ecologically clean fuel has great significance. In the Lenin region, near Dushanbe, they are now building a large fueling station which can serve up to 500 buses around the clock. It will be opened in July of this year.
While many claim little of substance was really accomplished at the Geneva summit last fall, it did mark the resumption of cultural exchanges between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, like this one, an exhibit from the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., being shown at the Hermitage Museum in Leningrad.
An exhibit of French masterpieces of painting from the National Gallery in Washington has opened in the Government Hermitage Museum.
Эта экспозиция — торжественное открытие, которое состоялось в одном из самых...
There was a lot to take note of in this festive exhibit opening which took place in one of the biggest halls of the museum. The Washington Gallery has among the best collections of French Impressionist paintings. Therefore, all of the 40 canvases shown here for the first time in our country allow one to become more fully acquainted with this most interesting period of painting history.
Представлены работы Гогена и Писаро, Ван Гога и Тулус-Латрека, Сера, Пикассо, других замечательных...
The exposition, which in the near future will also be in Moscow, shows works of Gauguin, Pissarro, Van Gogh, Toulouse-Lautrec, Seurat, Picasso, and many other wonderful artists. And finally, the most important thing to note is that this exhibit is one of the first exchanges made in the framework of the Soviet-American agreements reached at the Geneva summit.
The National Gallery.
Мы очень рады, что после некоторого перерыва...
We are happy that after a considerable break in time, cultural exchanges between our two countries are now being resumed, says a worker from the Washington National Gallery, Shirley Fletcher. This is only a beginning, and I'm sure it will help create mutual understanding between our people and at the same time improve Soviet-American relations.
From fine art to game shows is a major leap, but one often taken on Soviet TV. This show, which aired February 24th, highlights the best performers and contestants who appeared on this Soviet youth program. It is an unusual example of youthful exuberance of the kind rarely seen on Soviet TV.
На концерте прозвучали песни и музыка из фильмов.
In addition to variety shows, movies are often seen on Soviet TV. We have no idea what this particular film is about, but it could be the Soviet version of That's Entertainment.
Шляпа.
These Soviet performers received applause with their fancy footwork. But ordinary Soviet citizens need to be more careful with their feet, especially when they stray from official crosswalks. It was difficult for us to believe, but apparently jaywalking is considered to be a serious offense in the Soviet Union, since it can even lead to trouble in the workplace.
Where do you live? On the Black Sea. What do you mean, the Black Sea? Where do you live? We came here as tourists. Where do you work? On a state farm. Why do you break the pedestrian laws? We didn't know where to cross. How couldn't you know? Well, we just didn't know. Show your documents, please. Where do you work? Can you answer? No. Why? I don't want to. What do you mean you don't want to? This will mean we'll fine you. Well, go ahead. I'll check on this, and at work they'll make note of this and talk to you.
Now that's an absolute first. First of all, I didn't know Soviet citizens could talk back to the police, and I didn't know they could do it on television. What's going on here?
Well, first of all, you can talk back to that policeman. That's the militia man, the local policeman in charge of traffic, pedestrian, street situations. You don't talk back to the KGB agent, a different type of security representative. And it's a wonderful little piece because there's at least two political nuances to the piece. One is, the constant Muscovite complaint is the reason we have troubles that our escalators don't work and various other things don't work is all these peasants come in from who knows where, they don't know the traffic rules, they're walking in the middle of the street. And the second is that little altercation between the worker and the militia man at the end about, no, I won't show you my pass.
And the worker won.
Well, no, the worker doesn't. No, the worker doesn't. You don't know what happens, and this is a message, by the way, that started under Andropov. I think the message there is, what are you doing on the street? Yes. We're going to find out at your place of work just what you're doing.
Yeah. Norma, is that a normal occurrence for a housewife to be crossing the street and to be told, show me your documents?
Well, I don't think it's average, but I think what I felt about that was it was the rough way in which a bureaucrat treats the ordinary people. Okay. Like, where do you come from? Where do you live? Like, you peasant, in the pejorative sense.
And talking down.
Yeah, and then as Nick says, the fact that she was from out of town. There's all sorts of messages there coming across.
And I think the conflict is with the authority over a presumed event which is not a crime. Although tourists to the Soviet Union often are told, don't jaywalk because you get a ticket. We've had people in our groups get tickets for jaywalking, and didn't mean too much for a foreigner, but it is the case. And here you find this peasant woman coming to the big city for the first time. Another thing, too, is that there's this history of not too much auto traffic on the streets, and especially if this person comes from a very small village, you wouldn't expect it. Here she's in the big city, and even Moscow, until the last 10 years or so, didn't have too much heavy traffic. That looked like Gorky Street, I'm not sure if it was. But all of a sudden, she gets nailed.
Stephen, what's the perception by the citizenry in Russia of those local police type as opposed to the big police?
Well, that they enforce the petty laws, but they're also corrupt and buyable. And you can get away with something with them where you, as Nick said, you don't talk back to the KGB.
I've always been. My impression of it is that they haggle a lot on the streets, constant arguments with them. You can fight over tickets. So they're not held in high regard. But one important political point, over the last 2 years, there has been a series of exposés about what Steve referred to, corruption in the local police, and there's supposedly been a crackdown and a cleanup, both to improve morale and to get the
a number of years
out.
ago, there was a big problem where there was one militiaman who was working in cahoots with a gasoline driver, and they were filling cars up right from the truck on the street, and he was directing traffic around, and they were both.
I guess that's life in a big city these days. Norma, what did you think of that bagging machine? Have you ever seen anything like that in the Soviet Union?
I haven't. In fact, I was wondering about all the plastic bags, first of all, but second, I thought it was wonderful. If I get there this summer, I'm going to call up and order some groceries. But if you notice, there were only a few staples you could buy, and it's
Make sure
limited.
it's mackerel, tomato sauce, or tea.
Okay. Well, it'll be summer. Maybe there'll be tomatoes or something.
It also looked like everyone was getting the same thing, regardless of what was what.
I think that's exactly what it means, that they've set up an experimental service where those are basic goods that you can pretty much get, I think, at any time. I saw flour, tea, maybe an apple. Wasn't there an apple in there? Fairly common items, and so that's it. You can have delivered those 5 items that you could otherwise get.
Excuse me.
I was going to say, what bothered me about that episode was, now that we've tried it on the local level, maybe we should expand it. And a lot of things that work well on a small level go berserk when they try to make them big. And that's what I thought. Here they've got a good experiment, and they're going to blow it.
You really taught me a lot when we were discussing this a few minutes ago, when I said, well, maybe one of the cans you were throwing in the bag was dog food. And Norma, what you said, I thought was so great.
Yeah, there are hardly any dogs because most of the dogs died one way or another during World War II. So people do have dogs, but it's very few, and it would almost be the sort of people who would grow dogs as a hobby. To buy a dog costs a lot of money. To keep a dog costs a lot of money.
Yeah, we saw a segment once on dogs.
A dog anecdote that's very important. There is a free, an open private dog market outside of Moscow, a market where you can buy dogs and show dogs
as
pets.
And I once met a dog who emigrated to Israel. He didn't need a visa, though.
Why not?
A Great Dane.
You know, something that interests me, and I know, since we're talking about dogs and dog food and baggies and things, how could you possibly integrate something like a bagging machine into a centrally planned 5-year plan economy? Would there be a committee that would have to design this? And
for all we know, there's a ministry of plastic bags. That it's true that there's a highly centralized plan, but at the same time there's a proliferation of ministries and many ministries in the Soviet Union. I don't think we honestly even know all of them. There's, what, 50 to 53
And I think part of the recent economic reforms is to encourage some level of experimentation, as long as there isn't too much deviation from the socialist economy into something that resembles creeping capitalism, and as long as it doesn't undermine what the plan anticipates.
Well, to relate to things we've seen already, Joe, I mean, we have seen other programs on KTCA about servicing automobiles, and the plan definitely includes increased consumer services, and this falls under the rubric of that.
I was really impressed with the exhibit from the Washington Gallery at the Hermitage. And I thought it just looked marvelous. And I'm wondering, is that part of the new openness, the exchange, a cultural exchange? What do you see in that?
I thought all that Western art was decadent, and it was a corruptive of socialist realism.
I think the decadent art is still a very specified period, which is from the 20s on. There's a real problem in exhibiting constructivism and the Bauhaus and abstract expressionism, although there have been occasional exhibits there. It's interesting when you talk about Impressionist art, as we see here. There's a very fine collection of that in the Hermitage. A lot of it's not shown. And the Pushkin Fine Arts Museum in Moscow has one of the best collections in the world. And interestingly enough, in the history of the Impressionist movement, you may know that the Impressionists were never too popular in France in the 90s. They were collected by 2 big collectors. One was Morozov in Moscow, and the other was Gertrude Stein in the United States. So the result is the Impressionist collections go to the peripheries, and they come back even to France in terms of these roving exhibitions.
Why, though, under the Soviets, has officialdom cared so much about what art is shown and not shown?
Well, that's very, you know, Russians always say this affects art, it affects literature, it affects poetry. A Russian will tell you, in America you say, you know, everything is free and open. That's because you really don't care about it. Here we care a lot. Sometimes we kill over it. It's a very important subject.
Also, it's part of educating people to teach them the right attitudes so that they read the right books, see the right art. You know, there's that young man and young woman building socialism together in the future. That's a very important symbol for them.
But it was for us, too. Those always remind me of the murals in Rockefeller Center.
Yeah, but it's a bit different because even though you had those murals in Rockefeller Center or in U.S. post offices from the Depression artists, you did have an abstract form that was going parallel. In the Soviet Union in the 1930s, the party officially developed an ideology for art, which was called socialist realism. And this meant that art had to be realist in form and socialist in content. And this led to a derivative art that continued well into the 70s. Only in the mid-70s did you begin to see what was called unofficial art, which was the work of artists who might be doing these murals during the day and propaganda posters. They began painting abstract works, pointillist works, impressionist things, something which they knew about only from art books, because they hadn't seen these exhibitions.
Sounds to me like we could devote a whole show to socialist realism and impressionism, but I don't think we can. Thanks for being with us tonight, folks. It's been just marvelous. Thank you. And that's it, unfortunately, for the March edition of Channel 3 Moscow. As we mentioned earlier tonight, we'll be giving you a chance to browse through a recent edition of Pravda, translated into English by Associated Publishers of St. Paul. This edition highlights a topic that is close to our hearts here in the heartland, a message to Soviet farmers to update and streamline agricultural production. And for those of you who haven't had enough politics with the Minnesota legislature this week, Pravda also contains the complete text of Mikhail Gorbachev's address to the Supreme Soviet. So if you have your VCR ready, start recording now, and we'll transmit several stories to you at high speed. After the show, you can use your freeze frame advance to slow the images down to read them, okay? Here we go. We hope that you've enjoyed tonight's show, and we'd like to hear your comments and suggestions. For those of you who've been watching us for the past several months, we'd really like to know if watching our show has changed your attitudes about the Soviet Union. Please call us. Let us know what's on your mind. The number to dial is 642-1980. Now you'll be talking to an answering machine, so there's no reason to be shy. That number again, 642-1980. We'll be back with another edition of Channel 3 Moscow on Wednesday, April 16th at 8 p.m., so mark your calendars. And Jan Spaby and I will be here Friday night at 7 for Almanac. Until then, for Chris Sanda and myself, this is Joe Summers wishing you a good night.
Channel 3 Moscow is a production of KTCA-TV Channel 2 for stations of the Minnesota Public Television Network.